Namaste and good morning, everyone. And what a wonderful cue that is. Please, everyone, even if you've done it, please pull out your phones. Check, including your watches. Last night we tried, and we had 3 digressions. Let's aim for 0 this morning. Please check your phones, put them on silent. That way it allows Swamiji to have sustained attention to the topic, which is a beautiful introduction to our afternoon session on yoga. Swamiji is going to talk. We are not taking Q&A for this session, so for those of you who are going to come in the evening, we will have plenty of opportunity for Q&A. So get your questions ready and hold on to them. On behalf of Vedanta Society of Houston and our co-sponsors for today, Durga Bari, we'd especially like to thank Durga Bari for allowing us to use the facility. We are very, very graciously partnering with them and appreciate all of their help and support. Our topic this morning is, like I mentioned, on yoga. And for the few people who may be unfamiliar with Swami Sarvapriyananda, let me give you a few brief points about him. He is the minister and spiritual head of the New York Center, which he became the head in 2017. He took sannyasa in 2004, and in 1994 is when he joined Ramakrishna Mission in India. He is well known, not just on YouTube, but in all international forums. He is presented at the World Parliament of Religions in 2018. He has spoken at the United Nations. He is a frequent speaker in TED Talks and SAND and major universities, including Harvard and many other notable universities around the world. Many of you know that he is an avid reader. And I asked him this morning, Swamiji, what are you reading? And he said, it's not a well-known book, which is not surprising. The Fundamental Problems of Indian Philosophy, an Advaita Vedanta Perspective, written in the 1940s. And he was just sharing that it says volume 2, and he has yet been able to find volume 1. So if anyone finds it, let us know. So we know that the sign of a great teacher is one who makes the complex sound simple. For many of us, this great teacher is the voice of Vedanta for us here in the West. How blessed are we that we get to be with him in person for these 4 days in Houston. For 2 days in our center, today for 2 sessions at Durga Bari, and tomorrow for his final session with us. Swamiji, we are ever so grateful that you make Houston one of your regular stops. And we will ask you many, many times, please come more often. Swami Sarvapriyananda.
Thank you, Vani. I didn't know that was a trick question. She asked, she was sitting in the green room, she asked, what are you reading now? I didn't know she was going to mention it to everybody. But that reminds me of an anecdote, which I'll narrate to you. I've never said this in public earlier. I heard this a long time ago, decades ago, from a professor of English philosophy, a retired professor of English philosophy, who has since passed, Professor Bhui, Prabir Bhui. And the way I knew him was, I used to accompany him and Swami Atmapriyananda to various seminars and lectures. We'll be a fixture in the Calcutta lecture tour, in the lecture circuit. Not to give talks. Sometimes Atmapriyananda would give talks, but I would just go to listen. And he was this professor, he was a stock of wonderful anecdotes about the earlier years of Calcutta University, about academia there. And he was very learned and eloquent and very witty. Somebody asked him, why did you never marry? And he said, I have no space for a wife because I have too many books. Towards the end of his life, he extended his apartment. New construction was done for books, for more books. Now, he told me a story about this S.K. Maitra, whose book I'm reading right now, Sushil Kumar Maitra. Nowadays, nobody speaks much about him, but he was, if you read his books, he was evidently a brilliant man in the philosophy department. And so this is the anecdote from Professor Bhui. When S.K. Maitra was teaching at the Calcutta University Philosophy Department, the head of the department was none other than Dr. Radhakrishnan, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. He was the head of the philosophy department there, who later on went on to become the president of India and so on. So he was a true philosopher king, you know. Now, once Dr. Radhakrishnan heard that S.K. Maitra in the teacher's common room was making snide remarks about him. So he called him, Maitra, come here. So he went and, what do you think about me? Be honest. And then Maitra said, sir, if you permit, my view is that you are a first-rate orator, a second-rate politician, and a third-rate philosopher. And your reaction, that was exactly Dr. Radhakrishnan's reaction. He burst out laughing and said, all right. Now that shows his greatness, Dr. Radhakrishnan's greatness. And also it's wonderful that Maitra, he was so forthright. They had that kind of relationship where he could say this to the face of someone like Dr. Radhakrishnan. So it's one of his books, rare book which I found. It says volume 2. I don't know, I searched internet, couldn't find volume 1. Let me start with a peace chant. Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityurma amritam gamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. I am very glad to be here on this occasion. It's a special occasion where we are celebrating the International Day of Yoga. June 21st is the summer equinox. It's the longest day of the year. It's the International Day of Yoga. Let me start with an anecdote about the International Day of Yoga. I don't know how true this is, but I think it's accurate. In the first International Day of Yoga in 2015, 2014?
This is the 11th.
So 2014, 2015. I think it was 2015. I'm not too sure. 2015? Yes. I was in Portugal. In Lisbon, the Portuguese Yoga Confederation, they were celebrating the first International Day of Yoga with a big conference on yoga, and I was one of the speakers. It was a big conference. Again, it was Swami Atmapriyanandaji was supposed to go, but he fell ill, so I was like his sidekick, deputy. So I was sent. But I had a very interesting experience. The connection with the International Day of Yoga is this, that the head of the Portuguese Yoga Confederation is Swami Surya Amritananda, a Portuguese gentleman who used to teach yoga there. He has a big yoga school, and he became so interested in Indian philosophy and spirituality. Later on, he became a monk. He went to India, took sannyasa, and his name is now Swami Surya Amritananda. Now, his disciples, he speaks broken English, but his disciples, mostly Portuguese young men and women, they told me this story, that the link between him and S. Vyasa, Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anusandhana Sanstana, which is organizing today's program in collaboration with the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and Durgavadi. So these are the three organizations. So the connection between the S. Vyasa is actually responsible for the International Day of Yoga. Many people don't know the story. So they told me the story there. They said, our guru, the Portuguese Swami, he used to celebrate the International Day of Yoga for years, at his own level, in a small way, and he would say it should be celebrated all over the world. And we would think, those disciples told me, who will listen to us? We are one yoga organization in a small country in Portugal. Who's going to listen to us? Why should the world celebrate it? But it's a good idea, and they used to celebrate for years, actually. If you see their website, they have been celebrating for quite some time. Then when Prime Minister Modi came into power, this Swami Surya Amritananda, he had learned yoga, among other places, in the under Dr. Nagendra in the S. Vyasa in Bangalore. So he got in touch, he got this idea, he got in touch with Dr. Nagendra, who is also the yoga teacher for Prime Minister Modi. Now all this is my information from there, you may correct me later on, I don't know how much of it is accurate. So he got in touch with Dr. Nagendra, who is this Swami's yoga teacher and also Prime Minister Modi's yoga teacher. And Dr. Nagendra pushed this idea to the Prime Minister, who took it up in a big way and asked India's representative at the United Nations to propose it, that it should be observed. So this must have been in 2013 or 14 after Modi came into power. And it was, of course, then the idea took off in a huge way. Unanimously in the United Nations, the resolution was adopted, and 21st June, which is the longest day of the year, also happens to be that Swami's birthday. And because it's the longest day, maximum sunlight, and Portugal you get lots of sunlight there. So that's why he took the name Surya Amritananda, Surya meaning the sun and immortality. So this is the background which connects Portugal and S. Vyasa and Prime Minister Modi and India and yoga. And now we have the International Day of Yoga, which is being celebrated. Often these things start with a bang and then fade away. So first International Day of Yoga, yes, it was big across the world. But the beauty of this is the yoga is so popular and so beloved that each International Day of Yoga since then has been a big affair. So, and it's going to be, because it has millions of followers all over the world and it's continuously growing in popularity. So I'm glad that S. Vyasa, in collaboration with the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston, and thanks to Durgavadi for giving us the venue here and making it all possible, is spreading awareness about yoga. We also remember on this day, Swami Vivekananda. There was an article in 2013 in the Wall Street Journal. The man who brought yoga to the West, Swami Vivekananda. Of course, Swami Vivekananda is very well known for his Raja Yoga, his first book. You know something, there's an interesting, curious historical fact. There was another book before this. Before he became a monk, he wrote like a pamphlet on music. Something is there. Babu Narendranath Datta. That's the book. But anyway, but actually the first book is Raja Yoga, and it was written in New York. It composed in New York. He would meditate on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras and then dictate, and one of his dedicated disciples, she would be sitting with the pen dipped in ink. The moment he would start talking, she would write it down. And that's how the book was composed, Raja Yoga. And it was published during his lifetime itself in 1895, so with his full approval and all that. So that is the history. He's also well known for Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. In fact, this fourfold classification of yoga, which is sort of standard now, one way of looking at yoga, this originated with Vivekananda. Wide variety of meditation techniques across Hinduism. He classified it under Raja Yoga, the way of meditation. Of course, the central text there would be the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. More of that later. But he also spoke about Bhakti Yoga, the wide variety of devotional practices which you get across many traditions in Hinduism. Then also Jnana Yoga, the way of inquiry, philosophical inquiry, Advaita Vedanta, which we will speak of this evening. There's a talk called Oneness. And something Vivekananda gave special emphasis on, Karma Yoga. How to transform our action into spirituality. Which he was prophetic in his vision, seeing far into the future. That this would become very important for people in the future, how to transform our daily actions into spirituality. So the 4 yogas of Swami Vivekananda, broadly speaking. Now, the Wall Street Journal says that he introduced yoga to the West. Often we think that Swami Vivekananda never taught Hatha Yoga, which is the central thing which is being celebrated today, the International Day of Yoga. But if you look closely at his life, he did teach. There is an anecdote in which to an American disciple, a young man, he is teaching Shirshasana, headstand. And I have just a few days back I was reading where he would often teach pranayama, but all in service of meditation, good health and meditation. So it is not true that he did not teach Hatha Yoga, he did. And then of course many Teachers, and today we also must remember 3 great teachers from same place in India, Mysore. B.K.S. Iyengar, very well known, and then our Pattavi Joyce and Krishnamacharya. Just a few days back somebody presented me with a biography, I'd never seen it, biography of Krishnamacharya. So they were all from Mysore and they would teach yoga in Mysore and they were supported by the Maharaja of Mysore, but they made such a big impact. In fact, today what we see as everywhere there are yoga studios, they're called yoga studios, New York especially, every other block or every other street will have a yoga studio. We owe a great deal to those, especially, I don't know if Krishnamacharya ever came to the United States, I'm not sure, but of course Pattavi Joyce and B.K. Iyengar were here. And Krishnamacharya certainly trained a number of interested Westerners who went to India to learn and then come back. So today we remember them also. It's just these solitary men, yogis, who did not have money, who did not have an organization, who did not have military power, political power, nothing. Just that what they were teaching was so valuable and wonderful, it caught on like wildfire. And it's a phenomenon across the world now. That conference in Portugal opened my eyes. There are yoga confederations in every European country. And they had come and they were presenting there. Yoga, if we look at the etymology of the term, yoga, one meaning is yujir yoge, that means to connect the jivatma to paramatma. Anything that connects you to God, connects us to the ultimate spiritual reality of the universe, that's a yoga. In fact, in Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapters, each chapter is called a yoga. And the most interesting, the first yoga is a yoga of depression, Vishada Yoga, Arjuna Vishada Yoga, the yoga of Arjuna's depression. And it's true. It's only when we see through the hollowness of material life that it's important, but that by itself will not suffice to fulfill us. Then the inquiry into yoga starts. Our entry into yoga is a conscious entry, a deliberate entry. We are looking for something that will give us deeper meaning, a deeper level of well-being, not just physical well-being. The great teacher of yoga, Patanjali. So Patanjali Yoga Sutras. It's a great teacher of yoga. He is supposed to have given 3 great systems of knowledge to humanity. Medicine for the body, medicine for the tongue, language, and medicine for the mind. Medicine for the body, so he is seen as the source of Ayurveda, the science of, the traditional Indian science of medicine, physical well-being. But that's also holistic, it's not just physical. It's physical, pranic, mental, emotional, all of that. And then for mind, medicine for the mind, for the illness of the mind, is yoga. At the source of yoga is Patanjali. Patanjali himself is the source of yoga. But another thing is associated with Patanjali. Language, grammar. You know, Panini's grammar is the first and original systematization of Sanskrit. But Panini's grammar it's understandable only through Patanjali's Mahabhashya, the great commentary on Panini's grammar. So Patanjali is at the source of Sanskrit grammar also. Ayurveda, Vyakarana and Yoga. Ayurveda, Vyakarana and Yoga. There is a nice anecdote about grammar which I must share with you. I like this story. So Patanjali, we know, is an incarnation, avatar of Sheshanaga. So Sheshanaga, for those who don't know, Vishnu, he is lying down, he's a bit of a couch potato. So he lies down always, and his couch is this cosmic serpent, Sheshanaga, who has 1,000 hoods with flames coming out of each hood. So this cosmic serpent, on that Vishnu reclines. This is a symbology of that. And that cosmic serpent's incarnation is Patanjali, Rishi Patanjali. So the source of so much wisdom and wonderful systems of knowledge. Ayurveda, Vyakarana and Yoga. Now about Vyakarana, Ayurveda many people know, Yoga many people know. The Vyakarana story is very interesting. So he was teaching Sanskrit grammar in order to popularize his great commentary, Mahabhashya. He was teaching Sanskrit grammar to his students, and it is said that he had 1,000 students. A story. So 1,000 students, they would sit in a big hall like this, and Patanjali would sit on the stage. Now he had a rule. He said, when I start teaching, the curtains should be drawn, and from behind the curtains I will teach. As long as the class goes on, you should not open the curtains. The students agreed, but students are always naughty, mischievous. So once the students were very curious. One student was so curious, he wanted to see what's going on behind the stage. But the class was wonderful. We think Sanskrit grammar is boring, but those Pandits who love Sanskrit grammar, for them it's the most interesting thing. And the class on grammar was wonderful. Every student felt that the master Patanjali is speaking to me personally and clearing up my doubts. So one day when the class was going on, this mischievous student, he went to the edge of the stage and he lifted the curtain and he peeked inside. What's going on there? And inside he did not find the stage. He found the cosmos, stars and planets and all, and the vast, the stunning spectacle of the Sheshanaga, the cosmic serpent, with its 1,000 heads, hoods, with flames coming out of them. And the student was so stunned, every hair on his body stood on its end, and he fainted and fell down. But before he could let go of the curtain, one spark of that fire escaped through that curtain, under that curtain. And immediately the students were turned into ashes. They were all incinerated. Now Patanjali immediately took on his human form, Patanjali form, Sheshanaga into human form. He lifted the curtain and he jumped out, crying out, alas, alas. In Sanskrit actually it's ha ha ka. I mean in Sanskrit ha ha is just opposite of English alas. In Sanskrit the ha ha means alas. What a tragedy. So he jumped out. His sorrow was not for the students. His sorrow was what will happen to grammar now. Who will learn grammar? At this moment, one student came in from the door. So, sir, may I come in? So I think he had gone out for a washroom break or something like that. Or maybe the student being naughty, he had forgotten. He wanted to escape from a grammar class. I know, for us, actually grammar is not that boring, but somehow it has got a bad name. When we were kids, we used to have the traditional Pandits. Now all the teachers are the school, college, university system. But we had the Pandits from the traditional Sanskrit schools. They were very interesting characters. When he would teach us, a Pandit would inevitably fall asleep. and we would be mischievous. We would play and suddenly the Pandit would awaken. And he would see chaos, utter chaos in the classroom. And he would scold us. But even the scolding was in Sanskrit. Brahmachapram dadami. I'll give you this. How do you translate that? A smack, which is Brahman, which is an infinite smack. Ardha Chandram dadami. I'll grab you by the scruff of your neck and throw you out of the class. So like that. So Patanjali thought, oh, one student is alive. How wonderful. At least grammar will be saved. He went and embraced the student and finally taught him all of grammar. See, these stories are prolonged. Then the student graduated. He left with his notes. This is crucial, notes of the Sanskrit class in palm leaf. On his way back to his village where he would establish a grammar school, Vyakarana school. On the way, long journey, hot like Houston. And then he fell asleep under a tree to rest, and he had kept his notes by the side. A goat, which was chewing grass, found these notes, Sanskrit grammar notes, and started chewing, palm leaf, chewing them. Suddenly the student woke up and he drove away the goat, but to his horror, a part of it was eaten. And they say that even now a part of the commentary is not available. It's called Ajabhakshita Bhashya, the commentary on grammar which has been eaten by a goat. That part is missing. We don't know what was said there. I think it's an elaborate story just to justify, but some notes were lost. It's like a typically school kid story. But where is your homework? The goat ate it. Anyway, so this is the story of Sanskrit grammar. Patanjali, he wrote this classic Yoga Sutras, 4 chapters on yoga. And that has become the central text. Even the great teachers of Hatha Yoga, Krishnamacharya, Pattabhi Jois, B.K.S. Iyengar, they said that their goal was ultimately people will become interested in the spiritual side. When they find the benefit to the physical side through yoga and through asanas and through pranayama, they find a tremendous benefit which people are getting throughout the world. Then they will look for deeper and deeper levels. They'll become interested in the original text. They'll become interested in Gita, in the philosophy, in yoga philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, Vedanta philosophy. In this way, that was their idea. That's what would happen. And it's true. I have myself seen it. In the yoga conferences I've seen, many, if not most of the yoga teachers, the Hatha Yoga teachers, from all over the world, from Europe I saw, they're all interested. So you're teaching yoga for some time. Afterwards, you want some more knowledge, some more expertise on what you're teaching. So they become interested in studying the Yoga Sutras. They become interested then from there in learning Sanskrit. From there, Gita, Upanishads, Sankhya philosophy, Vedanta philosophy. So almost all of them become very interested. The physical benefits are undoubted. But the spiritual benefits, the psychological benefits and spiritual benefits are even many times more greater. There's a story about Maharshi Mahesh Yogi. He is the one who started the transcendental meditation. So when he first came here and started transcendental meditation, he came to New York actually. The story, I don't know again, it is apocryphal probably, but he went back to India and his brother monks asked him, what is this that you're teaching Americans? That if you meditate, you won't get wrinkles and you will age more slowly and your immunity system will be better and you'll look beautiful, which is all true, but that's not the real purpose of meditation. He gave a very nice answer. Who? Maharshi Mahesh Yogi. He said, I tell them what they want in the hope that they will want what I want to tell them. So I'm giving you what you want. You will get what you want. You will get it definitely. Resistance to disease, slowing down the aging process, a better body, and all of that, yes, you will get. But there is something much higher. So maybe your confidence will come on me that you listen, that this is something deeper and higher. The deeper and higher thing is the mind, managing the mind. And that's what is the central project of yoga, managing the mind. One meaning of yoga is Yujir Yoge, connecting the Jivatma to Paramatma, the man, the human being to the divine. But the second meaning of yoga is this mind management, Yuj Samadho. Meditative absorption is yoga. Meditative absorption is yoga. One sadhu put it beautifully. I'll tell you in Hindi what he said and I'll translate. He said, आपको लगता है कि संसार के चलते मन अशांत है, लेकिन सच तो यह है महात्मा जी, अशांत मन के चलते संसार है. We think that because of the world my mind is restless. I have no peace. I'm always troubled. People are troubling me. My health is troubling me. Politics is troubling me. So many things in the world are troubling me. So because of the world, my mind is troubled. But this monk said, no. The truth is, because your mind is troubled, you have this samsara. Ashant man ke chalte samsara. What does this mean? Isn't the world full of problems there? What does it have to do with my state of mind? See, it is our state of mind which makes everything many times worse. Always I give the example of doctors. Many of you have doctors. You know, you have dealt with hundreds and thousands of patients in your career. You have always come across patients who have serious illnesses and yet they react with calmness and dignity. Patients who have minor problems, but they just lose it. They become very upset. Now, who is suffering more? The one with the serious disease but reacts calmly? Or the one with a minor problem but becomes utterly upset? Who is suffering more? The second one is suffering more. It is because of my mind that my suffering increases manifold. So really, to tackle suffering, one must tackle the mind. Yes, of course, yoga is holistic. Physical suffering is there. There is a way of tackling physical suffering. Yes, Vyasa, if you go there to the Bangalore, I've been there many, many years ago to the headquarters in Bangalore. Tremendous amount of work is being done there to gather, first of all, to gather scientific data in a modern way to see the effectiveness of yoga and Ayurveda. So that is being done. That's very important. And also many courses are being for teaching yoga teachers, then also for treating patients. All of this is being done. So the physical side of it is not denied. In fact, it is a central part of it. Physical health. Sharira madhya khalu dharma sadhanam. A sickly body is no good for spirituality. Body is the first instrument of dharma. And of course for moksha also. The first basis, foundation. Swami Pavitranandaji, who was the head of the Vedanta Society. Before me it was Swami Tathagatanandaji. Before that Swami Pavitranandaji, long before my time. But his disciples are still there. So one of them said that he would often say about taking care of your health, do not abuse the horse you cannot dismount from. Don't abuse horse anyway, but do not abuse the horse you cannot dismount from. Vedanta, it's all very good to say I am not the body, I am not the mind, but until it's a fact, and even after that, don't take care of the body, because after all, even if you're not the body, it's a wonderful, wonderful instrument. It is your instrument for doing things in the world. It is your instrument for God realization. So, body. But then, next is managing the mind. That is a deeper and higher science, and yoga wants to take us there. How do you remove suffering? How do you attain ultimate peace and fulfillment? Through mind management. That is the central teaching of yoga. I remember I was in Gangotri, this is about 20 years ago, and I would sit near the Ganga and watch the river. And remember, now I understand, I was, I think, a little bit hungry. I was much younger, and the food was very simple. So I would pluck these apples from the trees and munch on the apples. And those apples were not ripe, so they were half ripe, and one monk came and scolded me. Aise mat khaiye Mahatma ji, daant kharab ho jayegi. You will spoil your teeth because there's something there in the apples which might not. And then later I realized, I was there for just 2 months. This monk was staying for years and years. So probably he wanted the apples to become ripe so that he could eat it. Then he sat next to me and he said something very valuable which I want to share with you, which really stayed with me. So this was in the rainy season, just after the rainy season, before Navaratri. And the river in Gangotri was in full spate, with a lot of water rushing there. And he said, look at this river, O monk. Nadi ko dekhiye Mahatma ji, Ganga ji ko dekhiye Mahatma ji. Look at the Ganga, O monk. You see, there is tremendous amount of water. Just after the rainy season. And the water is, it is dirty. Dirty means in the sense, there is a lot of soil and everything, landslides which flow into the water. You see, it's brownish. It's brownish. And he said, you can't drink it. You can't give it to anybody else to drink also because it's full of silt and soil. And he said it is dangerous. Just the day before, somebody had been swept away and killed. It's very fast moving and dangerous. And there are rocks, very big, sharp rocks there. Now he said, Vishayika man, a worldly mind is like this. There are many, many thoughts uncontrolled, like this river you're seeing. So much water. One, these thoughts are impure thoughts, most of them. anger, envy, unhappiness, depression, dislike, discontentment, impure thoughts, negative thoughts, heavy thoughts, just like that water which is brownish. And he says, those thoughts will not give you any peace, give the worldly person any peace, nor will they give anybody else any peace. Just like this water you cannot drink and you cannot give anybody else to drink. Similarly, the thoughts in a worldly mind sunk in worldliness, will not give any peace to that person. And also around that person also, there will be a circle of no peace, restlessness, unhappiness. You'll scatter that around yourself. And finally, he said, it is dangerous. Worldly mind, dangerous. You don't know what will happen. Like that this river is dangerous. Anybody who stepped into it is swept away and killed. Just yesterday he was saying somebody was killed. Similarly, this worldly mind can destroy us. People committing suicide. Often those who commit suicide, if they have somehow saved, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours later, they would think, why was I trying to commit suicide? Mind. Very dangerous fellow. Sri Krishna says, your best friend, your worst enemy. Worst enemy, uncontrolled mind, the worldly mind, the mind sunk in worldliness. $1 million, next $1 million, next $1 million. Rat race. And there's a saying that if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. I'm not saying that you should not run it. It pursues prosperity, definitely. But at some point, one must be intelligent enough to say, enough. This is enough for me. I don't need to pursue it any further. This is not a very high goal in life. There are much greater things in life to be achieved. Doing good to others, service, much greater. Spirituality and enlightenment, much greater. Final goal of every human being. So those things are there yet in life. Swami Ashokanandaji, who was the head of a Vedanta society in Northern California in the 1950s, 60s. That was the height of the Cold War, beginning of the Cold War actually, between the USA and USSR in those days. So he said, look at these two societies. Our society means America, capitalism. Their society in Soviet Union, communism. And both are fighting to establish one of them. And maybe one day one will win. We know which one. America, thank God. The Americans, what if USSR had won? My God, what would have happened? I don't know. But anyway, but then he made a point. Whichever wins, these two paradigms, a capitalist society, free market society, or a communist society, they are all very this worldly philosophies. What is the goal of life? For something in this world, what's beyond? Anything higher? Nothing. After some time, when you're 40, 50, 60, 70, what does this, whether you're capitalist or communist, what does it offer to you? What meaning does it have in life? Nothing. And then he says, but I look back upon where we came from. India, in those days, 1950s, he says. In India, the idea that moksha, nirvana, kaivalya, mukti, and so many words are there. This is the goal of life for everybody. Enlightenment and freedom, not just for Buddha, not just for Vivekananda, for everybody. God realization, enlightenment. You may not, I may not, you may not consider it our goal right now. But it is available to us. Society says it's a realistic option. It's actually there. You see in society so many sadhakas are there, spiritual practitioners, both householders and monks. That's why the contrast, it's good to travel abroad and then look back upon India. Of course, India is also very fast changing right now. But you look back upon India and then you begin to see this uniqueness. And the greatest uniqueness of India is this spiritual possibility, the higher spiritual possibility of human beings, and not just theoretical, open to everybody and openly accepted throughout society for centuries and millennia. It's a great thing to have in the back of your mind, even if you are chasing power, wealth, politics in this life right now, even at the back of your mind, it's there. Funny incident. I will not take names. This is from, well, I will not give any details. This person who, a very powerful politician in India, rose to very top levels in national politics. So she was initiated with mantra. And she was part of politics in a state where she came from, which in India is known for, or at least at one time was known for its lawlessness and criminality and all that. And this lady, who is a politician, she would go around carrying a gun in her bag, in her purse. In Texas, you might say, so, what's the big deal? Swami, this is Texas. Everybody has a gun in their purse. Yeah, but in India, it's a rare thing. So somebody asked her, you have taken Mantra Diksha, are you practicing? And she said something very interesting, very honest. She said, Swami, what I do, she said in Hindi, what I do for a living right now, and meditation and mantra, the two do not go together. So I remember the mantra and the technique, and I will do it after I retire. But this idea, whatever I'm doing now, this is there for me. Something great and wonderful, which has meaning through till the end of life and beyond. So this is the idea of spirituality. Let's take a quick look at the Yoga Sutra, which before I wrap up. Patanjali Yoga Sutra says it all boils down to management of the mind. One more little anecdote from the life of the Buddha, which I like very much. What does spirituality do for us? The physical side of yoga, what it does for us, we can see. We will see now. It's a well demonstrated fact, the benefits of yoga. But what is exactly the benefit of spirituality? So it seems one day Buddha was asked, and it's from the original sources, so it's not later on WhatsApp story, it is original Pali sources. So one of the monks bhikshus asked Buddha, I have a question. He said, ask. You taught us that there is suffering. First noble truth of Buddhism. And there is a cause of suffering, that is desire. And there is an end to suffering, nirvana. And there is a way of ending suffering, Ashtanga Marga, eightfold path in Buddhism. Buddha said, yes. So what is your question? You told us that he had seen suffering, old age, disease, death, Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. The 4 sights which Prince Siddhartha saw before he became the Buddha. Old man, and then a sick person, and a dead person, old age, disease, death. This is suffering. And for everybody, universal suffering. Now we are following what you have taught. To go beyond suffering. We are practicing. You are your disciples. But we are also getting old. Still, we are also getting sick. Some of us have died. And moreover, you, the Buddha, you are getting old. He lived to the age of 80. You are getting old. You get sick sometimes. And I guess one day you will die also. So my question is, how have you overcome suffering? You told us, suffering is there. What is suffering? Old age, disease, death. And there is a way out of suffering. Become enlightened, then you will go beyond suffering. But you are Buddha. You are enlightened, presumably. So you have gone beyond suffering. But I see you are getting old. You get sick. And I guess one day you will die. Which he did. What was the Buddha's answer? The Buddha's answer was, the nature of suffering is like a man hit by 2 arrows. The first arrow is what the world throws at you. Disease, sickness, problems in the world, old age, and ultimately death. This is the first arrow which the world throws at you. The second arrow is your reaction to that. How do I confront, how do I manage what the world is throwing at me? If you are a cricket, like the bowler is bowling at you, how do you skillfully handle that ball which is coming at you? And Buddha said, what I teach you will allow you to escape the suffering of that second arrow. It will completely change the way you handle life. About the first arrow, I cannot do anything. By the way, yoga is such a comprehensive system. Both first arrow and second arrow, the yoga handles. First arrow, it will at least reduce. It cannot eliminate old age. It cannot eliminate disease. Cannot certainly eliminate death. But it can reduce the impact to some extent. But the real power of yoga comes, as the Buddha said, second arrow. Our handling of life itself. For that, the mind has to be spiritualized. Yoga has to work on the mind. That's what Patanjali does. So when you come to Patanjali Yoga Sutras, when we come to Raja Yoga translation of Swami Vivekananda, it's all about mind management. Look at the definition of yoga given by Patanjali. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is cessation, stilling of the movements of the mind. Thoughts, ideas, memories, desires, feelings, emotions. These are the movements of the mind. The mind, compare it to a lake and is continuously breaking out into waves and ripples. And yoga is gaining control of the movements of the mind and the ability to still it. Still the movements in the lake of the mind till it is a calm, pure, motionless lake. Okay? Supposing this is possible, what is the gain of it? What will I get out of it? Then Patanjali says in the next sutra, Tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. Then the witness consciousness is appreciated, is seen, it remains in its real nature. Drashta, seer, it remains in its real nature. Swami Vivekananda explains that imagine the mind is like a lake. And imagine the water of the lake is clear and not muddy, clear water. And all the movements of the lake have been stilled. Then what happens? You can see straight through to the bottom of the lake. Similarly, the claim is, if the lake of the mind is purified and stilled, then you can see through the mind. You will see you are not the mind. You are the witness of the mind. You are not a body. You are not a mind also. But we are, what are we? We are pure consciousness. Drashta, the Sakshi. Going back to that anecdote I told about sitting on the bank in Gangotri and that monk, he said, remember the anecdote, the 4 points he made, like the river, too much water, too many thoughts. Polluted water, it's not polluted, just soil. So muddy water, impure thoughts, worldly thoughts. Then you cannot drink that water, nor can you give anybody else. Similarly, this mind will not give peace to me and I will not give peace to anybody else. And fourth, that it is dangerous. Just as this torrential water is dangerous, similarly the torrential uncontrolled mind is dangerous. It will harm us. It will harm us. He says, now that monk told me, Agar aap jade mein aayenge Mahatma ji, if you come in winter, you will see the same river in front of you. It's mostly frozen. Some water is there. So he said the water will be less, controlled. Similarly, the yogi's mind, the thoughts are controlled. In the sense, what you want and what you find desirable, only those thoughts will be there in the mind. So controlled thoughts, one. What a great thing that would be, to escape from this pattern of uncontrolled thoughts, repetitive. People are tortured by the mind. Sometimes you find some poor souls, they commit suicide. A psychologist said, you notice why they blow their brains or they shoot them. They want the mind to stop. They want the mind to stop. Somebody recently committed suicide. It was in the news. He left a message saying, stop. Maybe he was talking to his own mind. So freedom from too many thoughts and repetitive thoughts and negative thoughts, only the thoughts which are chosen by me, they will stay in the mind. That's one. Just like this less water. Second, the water is absolutely clear, pure. खुद पी सकते हैं महात्मा जी, दूसरों को भी पिला सकते हैं. You can drink it yourself, you can offer it to others. Similarly, the yogi's mind is peaceful, pure, it gives you joy and peace, and you scatter this peace and joy around you. People around you feel it. They feel uplifted, they feel strengthened, they feel purified. One European lady, if I'm not wrong, I thought it was Josephine MacLeod, but somebody corrected me, it's not true. Somebody else said about Swami Vivekananda. This lady said, I have met many great people in my life. I met the Tsar of Russia, not Putin at that time. And I felt in front of the Tsar of Russia, this lady is saying, I felt how small I am, how great he is. But when I met Swami Vivekananda, I felt how great he is and how great I am. That was the effect that Vivekananda would have on others. So the yogi's mind, it uplifts, purifies. And the fourth point he said, it is not dangerous. Then the river at that time is so shallow, you can walk across. Similarly, the yogi's mind is not dangerous. Krishna says it's your best friend. The controlled mind, the yogic mind is your best friend. And one more thing he said, which matches the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. The monk said, there's a wooden bridge. Now there is more than one bridge over Gangotri, but the old bridge is a wooden bridge. He said, if you go, pul per aap jaake chavanni gira doge Mahatma ji, if you throw a quarter from the bridge, it will sink to the bottom of the river because it was very still at that time. And he says you can read out the denomination of the coin from the bridge through the water. It's so clear like crystal glass. Similarly, Patanjali says, Tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. When the mind is stilled in meditation, yoga chitta vritti nirodha, when the mind is stilled by yoga, one sees through to beyond the mind. You see that, oh, I am not the mind. It becomes very clear. The two are separated. The two are separated. Body, mind on one side, I, the witness consciousness on the other side. This comes from the Sankhya philosophy, Purusha and Prakriti. What's the use of that? You will immediately realize every problem, the first arrow which the world throws at you, it affects the body, it affects the mind also, but not you. You are perfectly all right. In the midst of disease, yesterday I was quoting Swami Shivananda, disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. In his old age, he had many physical ailments. In his 80, he was nearly 80 at that time. President of Belur Math in India. In the morning, monks went to bow down before him. They had heard that last night he could not sleep because of asthmatic attacks. So one monk asked, Swami, how are you today? He said, I'm fine. In Bengali, bhalo achi. And since many of you Bengalis, I can use the Bengali term. Bhalo achi. But then the monk said, but we heard last night you couldn't sleep because of the asthmatic attacks. Then the Swami, as if he's realizing for the first time what that monk is asking. He said, oh, you mean the body? Not good, not good, not good. Oh, Shorir, ekebari bhalo na. This idea that I am not the body is natural to him. He's aware of the body, he's aware of the suffering in the body, and yet this is the difference between him and us. Suffering of the body overwhelms us. I am suffering. This is the difference. In the next sutra, Patanjali says, what happens otherwise? Suppose I don't manage the mind. Suppose I don't meditate. Suppose I cannot still the mind. Like most of us, we can't. Then what will happen? Like the river in rainy season. What will happen? Vritti sarupyam itaratra, Patanjali says. You will become identified with the movements of the mind. You will be covered by the movements of the mind. You will be unable to distinguish yourself from the mind. I and the mind become one. I will say, I am this person. I am this guy, Sarva Priyananda, embodied in this body. And I have many problems. I have many complaints. Vritti sarupyam. The mind and a vritti, a movement in the mind in the form of anger comes up. I will not say, I am the ever-shining witness consciousness illumining the anger in the mind. No, I'll say, I am mad at you. I am angry. I am furious. Can you not separate yourself from the fury in your mind and be the ever-calm witness consciousness? What nonsense. I am angry at you. Notice the philosophy of anger or depression or anything negative. When I am angry, I am one with anger, and at that moment it seems utterly justified. You deserve my anger. I should be angry. How is it that I should not be angry? This demands anger. I am angry. And you, be the same person. After some time, after some days, maybe after weeks or months, at some point, we will look back and say that was wrong. I shouldn't have felt so angry. And I certainly should not have acted out of anger and said harsh and cruel things. I should not have taken revenge on somebody. How interesting it is that I, the same being, I felt it was fully justified. Now I feel it was quite wrong. Does it not happen? We feel guilty, we regret it. Almost always, whatever we think, say and do in anger, we regret it. You say, no, I don't regret it. And then there's a lack of maturity there. Then you're still angry. That's why. When the anger goes away, we regret it. What does that mean? It means it is the mind which became angry. It is the mind which again changed its view and regretted it. I am equally the witness of both. But that is not clear to me. And therefore, when the mind is angry, I become identified with it, and that seems right. When the mind feels guilty and regretful, I become identified with that, and that seems right. But the truth is, Patanjali says, you are neither. Nor angry mind, nor even peaceful mind. You are the ever peaceful light which illumines both angry mind and peaceful mind. So this is the core idea. How to do it? Ashtanga yoga is there. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. Whole technology. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote this wonderful book, Flow. His whole life, he passed away a couple of years ago. One of the major psychologists of our time. His whole life was a study of attention, focus, concentration. And there in his book, classic book, Flow, he says, he dedicates 2 pages to Patanjali Yoga Sutras. He says, in my study of the literature of the world on attention, concentration, I have not come across a more sophisticated system of controlling our attention than the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So it is wonderful that we are celebrating the International Day of Yoga. Very soon you will have the actual thing, not just a lecture. I congratulate S. Vyasa. I congratulate the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston. And of course, we are all very thankful to Durga Bari. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu. Thank you very much. Thank you.